I think, of course, of Newman, right? And what happens when you remove theology from the curriculum. The other disciplines come rushing in to become the controlling discipline, right? Psychology or, heaven forbid, music history becomes the hermeneutic key to all of reality. So there's a need to keep them properly ordered and properly organized, coherently organized toward a whole of the ultimate truths. Otherwise, it will become disorderly and fall apart. We owe, I think, our view of the arts as being purely subjective to a large degree to the Romantics in the 19th century, in which art and music could sometimes become a kind of substitute religion, a substitute metaphysics. And now I think we're suffering for that. In one sense, it exalted the role of the arts in society, it exalted the artist, but now I think we're paying for that. But with the idea that it's just simply subjective, it has no objective meaning. Fundamentally, the arts are about order. You think of the classical definitions of beauty. It's the unity, unitas, harmonia, sort of the harmony of the parts to each other and to the whole. And then there's claritas. There's that gleam that catches the eye, right? But fundamentally, it's about an ordering with something that attracts your attention and holds it. That is very, very, very objective. There's a subjective response that's involved there, but it leads directly to questions about the good and questions about the true. So I think we have to, in some ways, reclaim beauty and the art from the Romantics and their heritage. And we've talked about Marathon before. We were talking about Marathon before this formal dialogue. And I teach art and scholasticism from time to time. And his vision of the artist as a craftsman, doing excellent work in that part that he or she has been given to do. I think we need to rethink how we think about the artist and the work that the artist is doing. It is once transcendent, but it's also deeply humble and rooted in the physical and objective realities that we inhabit.
Right. Well, thank you for making that segue to Jacques Maritain, because I do want to talk a little bit right now about him. One piece of his work, Art and Scholasticism, is very worth reading. Dana Gioia encouraged me to read Creative Intuition in Art and Poetry. And I think in that book, Creative Intuition in Art and Poetry, which was a series of lectures Maritain gave at the National Galleries of Art in the 1950s, he makes a real passionate argument about why understanding the important role of beauty and art in the human good and truth-seeking. And he makes this incredibly important point that I think we all can resonate with, but maybe have never heard it expressed. And the modern mentality has relegated the subconscious to something just like a place of emotions and drives and passions that have no intrinsic ordering. And what Maritain argues is that, yes, we do have this Freudian subconscious, all of us, but we also have what he calls a spiritual preconscious. We have this place deep inside of us in our soul where the emotions and the reason come together and we perceive the unity of all things. So what Maritain describes along the lines of the experiences you were talking about, a beautiful piece of music, a beautiful work of art, a hike in the mountain can really awaken and nurture that piece of us where everything is integrated. And then nurturing that capacity allows us to then order the passions of the subconscious towards their proper end. In the absence of this understanding of the person that includes the spiritual preconscious, that excludes that this attraction to beauty is part of our ultimate fulfillment as human beings, we're left with really no guide to our subconscious. And then art and beauty becomes expression for the sake of expression, and in some strange way produces the self enclosed inside of itself, rather than the self expressing itself through work and art as a means towards literally working out, a piece of music or a piece of art is an object in the world, rather than working through the spiritual preconscious, through the subconscious into a work of art that is a reflection in some ways of our divine capacity for co-creation in the world. Okay, that was a lot of words, but my point is, why is it so important in the modern world to recover this sense that beauty is part of the spiritual pre-conscious and not simply a self-expression.
Right. Well, and I think there is a sense in which, in some ways, this idea that the arts and beauty were bound up with something much greater, made much more sense, I think, to a society in a world in which the arts were bound up with some form of religion, or they culminated in some sort of religious expression and religious worship. And I think a big part of the reorientation toward art and music as being a sort of a form of self-expression, the deeper, perhaps darker recesses of the human soul. These things correspond and arise historically, I think, around the same time as as the West is undergoing a profound loss of its sense of purpose in the transcendent, so I think what can happen is it can work the other way. I think an experience of the spiritual in the religious sense can reawaken a deeper level of the interior life, in which the spiritual, in the sense I believe you're using it, can be reanimated. I've experienced that myself in liturgical settings, where the beautiful music and what we might call the smells and bells are present, and a kind of spiritual awakening. So much that the reason is overcome, or that the will is overcome, is that they're brought up into a higher synthesis in which truth and goodness and beauty form a fundamental unity. It doesn't happen often. But it can happen. For me, as a child, it happened at a performance of the local symphony, performing the first movement of Beethoven's symphony, his Fifth Symphony. It opened up a whole new dimension of beauty that was in some sense spiritual, because it wasn't physically visible, and in some sense hidden. And then it happened later in my life in a religious context. So I think it can be both ways. I think go both ways. I think that the deeper spiritual recesses, the sort of non-Freudian preconscious, can become a source of spiritual in creation in the artistic sense, but then also a religious sensibility can inform and reanimate those things. And those things have been lost largely, but I think people are attracted to them. And when we propose ways to recover them, it can be very appealing and very attractive.
I agree. I mean, I think Maritan's point is precisely that what he calls poetic knowledge has been lost. And I think our modern systems of education focus on scientific knowledge, which is extremely important, and conceptual knowledge, describing the world. But poetic knowledge helps link our experiences in the world, whether those are in nature or in liturgy, back to this spiritual preconscious, and then shape our work in the world. So he's very clear that poetic knowledge is part of a practical intellect. It's distinct from a mystical experience of God, as important as that is. Poetic knowledge is about our capacity to enter into a contemplative outlook on the world and a contemplative act of creation. And so I think that the cost of this not being understood philosophically, who we are as human beings, or not being understood as an integrated part of education. I mean, to sort of make a joke, there's a book in the Princeton Public Library, and the title of it is How to Potty Train Your Kid to Get Them into Yale. It's a joke, right? But childhood development has been reduced to how to reproduce kids who are going to get the right kind of SAT scores and AP scores to get into highly competitive universities, as if all forms of human knowledge can be reduced to these test scores. And, you read articles about what's a good kindergarten preparation, and they talk about let's make our kindergartners college ready, as if the instinct of a child for play and music is somehow unrelated to their learning. I kind of am thinking it's the opposite. Of course, as a child grows, their capacity for reasoning and logic grows. But we don't want to stamp out of anybody of any age this intuitive attraction of beauty and the play that gives rise to and the music that it gives rise to. What we want to do is take those capacities and integrate them with other forms of knowledge, not squash them. And I've seen And I actually really believe this is true. I feel like a lot of students finish their formal education, and I mean, think of the word burned out. Like, how many people are burned out? Well, what's been burned? What's been burned is their creativity. What's been burned is their passion, and they're left
Right.
with just this sense that all I can do is climb the next rung and, get the next thing done. And they don't have that passion anymore. So if I'm passionate about bringing beauty and art back into education, it's because I want to fight the burnout culture.